So it's great to see you guys, especially to see some newer faces that I don't get to see too often. I know some people have skipped town to go to warmer venues in the South. But I'm thankful that you guys are going through the book of Romans. It's just great that God inspired Paul to write such a book and to keep it throughout church history because it touches on so many critical doctrines that are influential today, just like they were at the time when the church is first starting. And it puts the glory of God and the gospel and the history of salvation really on display for all to see, especially as he writes to a church that is not somewhere he's been yet. Okay, so it's a great application point, but also putting that foundation of what do we believe, what is actually going on with what God has done through Jesus Christ. So last week, when Emery taught, he got through what is probably the main theme verse of Romans. So go ahead and open up to Romans 1 if you're not already there. We're only going to get through a little bit more in Romans 1, but I wanted to read verses 16 and 17 again, because a lot of scholars are going to say verses 16 and 17 are the theme verse for the entire book of Romans. Like if you are in women's group, in the fall, the series was called Unashamed, and it's kind of based off of this statement from Paul in Romans 1, 16 to 17. So we're going to be passing the microphone around quite a bit because I'm going to ask someone to read it out loud, and we'll have a few table discussions. So as you have the microphone, hold it right here, and you're going to have to turn it on and off yourself. Yes. So somebody want to read Romans 1, 16 and 17. Okay, right over here. Now it's on. Oh no, I ripped it apart.
For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For in the righteousness of God is revealed from faith, for in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, but the righteous man shall live by faith.
Okay. I was distracting. Can you read it again?
For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, but the righteous man shall live by faith.
Okay, I think that phrase right there, the righteousness of God, is probably a major, if not the major theme of the book of Romans. So the righteousness of God is revealed. In particular, the righteousness of God is revealed in the gospel, that the death of Jesus Christ on the cross paid the penalty for our sins. And that payment was demonstrated and validated by God raising him from the dead. And that it gets applied to us who believe and are put our trust in Jesus Christ, who's the only way, the truth, and the life. But you also could see the righteousness of God as his attribute, that he shows his attribute in his activity of bestowing righteousness on those who believe, declaring them righteous. This, like last week when Emery brought up Martin Luther, that this is one of the big things that became a critical moment for him to consider. What is the righteousness of God? What does it mean to say good news? Not just that he is righteous, but that what he does for us who have trusted in Jesus Christ. So if we're needing to be brought into a right relationship with God, then what is our default? If that's a need for us to be brought into, right? Well, does that mean that by default we're children of God? Or that by default we're in the family of God? Or that by default we're going to spend eternity with God? No, that's not the default. The default is that you stand in a wrong relationship with God. And apart from God's work to bring you into right relationship, you would just stay there. You would be separate. Or the scriptures even go as far as saying being enemies of God. So there needs to be a transference, and that is God's revealing his righteousness by giving the gospel, by sending the Son. So today we're going to just look at the next paragraph, okay? Starting in verse 18. So does anybody happen to have in their Bible like a little header, a little title for this next paragraph? Yeah, Carol, what do you got? God's wrath against ungodliness. Anything similar? God's anger at sin. Unbelief has consequences. Okay, good. Yep. Okay. All right, good. Any other ones that we haven't got yet, Nanette? Okay. And then mine's the condemnation of the unrighteous. Yay. Nice, fun topic for today. Okay. So I think in this little short paragraph, we get 3 reasons why there's condemnation. How people suppress the truth of God, what they're suppressing, and then its fallout. That's what we're going to talk about. How do people suppress the truth of God? What are they suppressing? And then the fallout, which is the progression of this little paragraph. So first, suppressing God's truth. So what happens when God's righteousness, like we just saw, rubs up against sinful humanity who destroys themselves, destroys others, lies, commits all kinds of evil? What do you think is going to, there's going to be a little friction there. The demonstration of God's righteousness against sin and evil shows up in God's wrath. Is God's wrath an eternal, always going on thing? No. Before sin enters the world, Genesis 3, is God's wrath being displayed? No. Okay? Because there's nothing to come against. All right? So it is started and then it will be resolved because holiness and justice require it. So at your tables, I want you guys to take a few minutes to talk about what does it look like to suppress the truth of God's revelation at different age groups. Okay? So over here, you guys get the teenage years. Ooh. I don't know why everybody said woo, but yes, teenage years. Okay, and then the 20s, the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. Okay? So in those age groups, answering 2 questions. What was it like for you at that age to suppress the truth of God? Or what was it like for, your peers, because obviously you maybe weren't doing that. Okay? What was it like when you were that age? And what do you observe now about that age group of how they can or do suppress the truth of God like we read about in Romans 1:18. So I want you guys to read the verse at your table, answer those couple of questions. Okay? Give you guys about 5 minutes. All right? Okay, how about 30 more seconds? You guys are going first. Who want? Oh, yeah, everybody started looking at everybody else. Yeah. Okay. I was hearing lots of good discussion. So I'm going to read the verse and then we'll go through the age groups. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of people who suppress the truth by their unrighteousness. So this can show up in a variety of ways. You notice this is broad statement that people do this. So let's talk about how it looks like in each age group. All right, you guys go first. You got the teenage age group.
Okay, teenagers, back when we were growing up, they kind of grew up in the church. Our families went to church most of the time, but then they fell away sometimes. Nowadays, it seems like kids don't know about church. Parents ignore it, and they get caught up in all the worldly issues. And then that wickedness shows through.
Okay, all right. Yep, passing it along to the 20s.
You guys take it, my hearing aid's not working right. I can't even hear what's being said. Okay. Okay.
No pressure.
In the 20s, my attitude, and it turns out the majority of the people at this table, we were concerned about what's happening in our lives for fun and games today, maybe tomorrow, but the day after that'll take care of itself. And we weren't at all concerned about what's God think about whatever I'm doing. I don't pay attention. I don't care.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah, I've got
most of my friends were exactly the same at that time in my life.
Yeah, life's happening. Why should I get caught up in concerning myself with long-term things?
Well, more than that, why should I worry about what somebody else says? I'm going to do what I want. Good. I'm going to do what I want to do. Okay, how about right over here to this next table?
We're 40s, so I wanted the 30s to go first.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, who's going to do it for the 30s? Passing the buck. Oh, passing the buck again. Oh yeah, it should be on. Yeah, just talk into it, see what happens.
Hello.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we talked a little bit about being in your 30s. You're absorbed with what's going on within your immediate family. You're too worried about what's going to happen to me and my family. You don't really care about the other stuff. And I think it shows. I think in the 30s is where we've now got this woke issue and stuff. And I mean, it's basically gone right back to what it was when Paul wrote Romans. I mean, the Roman country was falling apart. I mean, they had more homosexual relationships going on. Nero had a male husband, wife, whatever you want to call them, and that was all public. And it was pretty much the 30 generation, I think, has brought that back out.
Okay. Yeah. Some good observations. Okay, over to the 40s.
Well, we both had a hard time remembering 40s because we're about 3 decades removed from that now. That probably tells you something of our age. But basically what we said were 40s are a time where you are not exclusively, because you'll do this in your 30s, 50s, even younger. But 40s is where you kind of take an assessment and says, where am I and where am I going? And so you're focused on career a lot because you think, well, I've only got limited time left to achieve something. I'm already in my 40s, and if I'm not there, I'm focused on that. I'm focused on my family and what's going on there. If you're in your 40s, you've got usually, not always by then, you've got older kids. You may even become a grandparent in your 40s, and that's okay. So you've got that focus going on, and you're not too interested in the Lord or what's going on there. Now, both of us have been Christians since very early ages, so we don't have a lot of experience with that, but there are a lot that just don't have the time, don't have the inclination to be too worried about that. But when you start to get grandkids, I think that's when you start to realize, and maybe even then you start to maybe begin to realize that you need to be doing something about getting them introduced to the Lord, if you're a Christian even yourself.
Good. Okay, on to the 50s.
Well, we talked about the 50s being a time of achievement. You've usually reached a comfortable point in your life with your careers, and your kids are off, and that quite often it becomes self-indulgent. You do things for yourself because you want to feel good. You're spending money, taking trips, having affairs, whatever. Well,
Yeah, totally true.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, we found it possibly to be a time where you're self-consumed instead of looking outward.
Yeah, maybe you spent the last couple of decades of your life focused on family, getting all that done, and now, well, I did this for a long time. Now it's about me. I've got decades about me now. Great. Okay, let's pass it over to the 60s.
Is this on? Is it on? Yeah, we're in our 60s. So
what are you doing right now?
well, we're kind of settled into our life and retirement, and the suppression part comes in when we gather with family who aren't believers, and we tend to, my wife and I, will pray, but that's about the extent of it. We don't, I would say we suppress Jesus when we're in a family group setting. We don't have a lot of Jesus believers in the family. So it's a struggle. And, we try and set an example, but then again, we fall back into our old ways because we're surrounded by the people who influence us. Family, friends, what have you. Our life group from The Rock a couple of years ago was great, but because of family and their things that they have to do during the week, our life group has kind of dissolved. So we don't really have anybody other than this group to share our thoughts with and our concerns. And so, again, the suppression it's not suppressed here because we're all believers. But when we get into a family group or something else, we tend to put ourselves in a shell, and we don't evangelize. We don't want to get shamed, if you will. I don't know what the word would be, but that's.
Yeah, especially making relationships that are going to continue on for several years,
lifetime.
making them uncomfortable, or
Yeah.
awkward, or all that. Mm-hmm. Okay.
We've bought Bibles for them. Whether they've opened the Bibles or not, we don't know. But we hope that they would. There have been instances where the family has had problems with health and what have you, and then prayer comes out. But other than that, it's non-existent. So I don't, it's just whether we're teenagers and we don't know what's going on, or whether we're 60 or almost 70 and don't. We still suppress. Yeah, complacent. And I'm not an evangelist. I don't know the word backwards and forwards, so I don't want to spout off something and then have somebody come back and ask me a rhetorical question or a real question, and I can't fulfill their needs, or I can't answer their question. So there's a suppression in that.
Okay. Well, thank you guys. Thank you guys for your transparency as well. I knew there was a lot of wisdom in this group, okay? And a lot of life experience. Because whether it was you, someone you knew, or something you saw in the news, or your observations now, there's a lot of ways you can do this. The spectrum is available, right? And whether you're young and have availability and access to doing who knows what, there's a lot of ways that you can suppress. You can have it through material goods, your career, relationships, various distractions that you can have. There's all kinds of categories. Or even creating substitutes, that I'm going to have something else in place of God, whether it is a genuine, actual religion that's well known throughout the world or whatever, or I just create my own substitute, like a popular person, an idol that's out there. So that addresses, I think, that suppressing is happening. So now let's turn to talk about what are we suppressing? What are people suppressing? What could we suppress the truth of God by? So let's go ahead and read verses 19 and 20. Because what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, because they are understood through what has been made, so people are without excuse. So I also want you guys to turn over to Psalm 19. Psalm 19. Keep your spot there in Romans 1, but turn over to Psalm 19. Several of you will probably recognize this psalm. It speaks quite similarly to what we just read in Romans. Psalm 19, okay, just the first half of it, verses 1 through 6. The heavens declare the glory of God. The sky displays his handiwork. Day after day, it speaks out. Night after night, it reveals his greatness. There is no actual speech or word, nor is its voice literally heard, yet its voice echoes throughout the earth. Its words carry to the distant horizon. In the sky, he has pitched a tent for the sun. Like a bridegroom, it emerges from its chamber. Like a strong man, it enjoys running its course. It emerges from the distant horizon and goes from one end of the sky to the other. Nothing can escape its heat. And he continues to go on. That what we see around us is something that reveals God's attributes. So, turn back over to Romans 1. If we're going to say it reveals God's attributes, what are some of those attributes? So I'll get the list started. The list could be really long, but we see at least his eternal power. Okay, so his power, God is all knowing. Okay, and let's go ahead and see some volunteers. What other attributes could not only you see in nature, but just some of the attributes he has?
Creativity. All you got to do is look at an infant child and figure, how could this happen?
Yes, creativity. Creativity. And then in the rest of the natural realm, you could see Oh, that one's different. That's beautiful. Wow, look at that thing over there. Yep. Humor. Okay. Yeah, that's a good one. I didn't put that on my list. It should have been there, but okay. Yeah. Good. Uh-huh. He's merciful. Okay. Great. Other attributes of God. Forgiving. Okay. Yep.
He would have to be immaterial since it's the universe that was created, which is material,
Yes.
including all space, time, and matter. So God would have to be immaterial, faceless, timeless. Those are all attributes God would have, that he would have existed before the creation.
That's right. Great. Okay. Loving. All-knowing. Caring. He's wise. He's good. He's holy. A lot of these things are more clearly on display when you look at the natural realm. Okay? Some of them are a little more, oh, I got to think about that, or maybe I need God's specific revelation here to understand that. So the list of ways that God has revealed his attributes, I mean, you could take volumes and volumes of books and books and books, right? But it's also interesting as well that his attributes are on display throughout this world and throughout time to people who have certain amount of knowledge and certain, less knowledge. People who are sitting in a Pacific Ocean island, versus people who are in America, versus people who are in Africa. They have a lot of the same things that they can see, but not necessarily like the same knowledge. They don't have the same books accessible, right? So there's different things that you could understand before Jesus, like Jesus up to the Industrial Revolution, and then since the Industrial Revolution to modern times. The amount of availability of knowledge, information, revelation, and what you can see. I mean, we don't have time, obviously, to go into huge depth with this. The apologetics class is a great class to go to. Okay, Tom and his daughter, where'd she go? Oh, she's back there. Casey, they teach that to say, how do we understand things that are true? How do we defend God's existence? Okay, that's a whole thing, little advertisement, okay? But it's still available for people to know that something is there. So I'm going to give a couple of examples, and then I want to hear from you guys of how you can look at what God has revealed in nature and in the mind of a person. Let's say that people don't have access to this, because for the vast majority of history and the vast majority of people, they have not had access to this. Okay? So first, when I look at the big picture and I see the stars in the sky, the vastness of space, the variety, the creativity of the plants, geological formations, all these amazing animals, the relative order of things. I mean, there's some, chaos and disorder, but hey, seasons happen on a regular basis. And these create rhythms. A lot of cultures and tribes and languages and nations and people groups rely on those rhythms in life to kind of dictate how they go by their lives. The powerful forces of nature, maybe tornado, hurricane, giant thunderstorms. Or this idea, man, there sure is a lot of coincidence going on around here. How are we going to explain it? What's the best explanation for it? So there's a lot of variety of explanations. They tend to stay around just a few themes of how to explain that, of why there is something instead of nothing. It's a simple question, right? Well, how come something exists instead of nothing existing? Why is there such a thing as the universe? There's be a few possible explanations that various religions throughout the world have tried to answer in a certain way. Like, one explanation is the stuff itself comes into existence by its own cause. It causes itself to come into existence, or that what we see is time plus space plus chance. That's just the answer for it. If you give it enough time, you give it enough space, you give it enough chance, it's bound to happen. Or another explanation that's very popular in the Far East is everything that exists is God, and those things are then particularized in this world. Like you, the chair, the building, the sky, is a emanation or a way the God shows up, existing in that thing, okay, in various Eastern religions. Or in a lot of the big monotheistic religions, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, another being created all of it. Now, their descriptions of that being are very different, okay? But those are some of the explanations that you get, because you got to account for what is all of this. Now, can I ignore it? Sure. Like for the first couple of decades, I was like, a tree's a tree, who cares? Why should I care about all this physical stuff around here? I don't really think it's beautiful. I'm not interested in it. It was a way for me to suppress it by dismissing it. But now it's like, well, I got to think about this. So how come that's there? Why is the sun there? Why does the stars stay where they are? Why does the earth operate the way it does? How do I explain this? So I think that's one big thing that's available to all people in all places at all times. Another is trying to come up with a philosophical explanation for some of the things we experience, right? Like in ancient times and in modern times, how do I have a reason to believe that there's something beyond me? Okay, like philosophers will come up with reasons. There's various arguments for why there's a God, like the Kalam cosmological argument, the moral argument that, hey, if there's such a thing as morality, there's probably a moral law giver. Do vast majority of people throughout the world think that it's probably not a good idea to murder? Okay? Now, the vast majority. Now, is this a morality by vote and popular opinion? No. But we're just suggesting that, hey, if there is such a thing as objective morality, maybe there is such a thing as a being who gave objective morality. Or the problem of evil. How many of you have heard of this? Why do bad things happen? Okay? The problem of evil. It has a counterpart with the problem of beauty. Why should I think that that thing is beautiful? Would all people agree, or the vast majority agree, that sunset is beautiful? Or look at these amazing things that exist. That causes me to pause. Well, is there someone else besides just me? And the fact that humans just think about these questions. The bear over there, he's not thinking about that. He's just thinking about his next meal or how to protect his cubs. That humans even think about these things. So those are, again, big, broad pictures, okay, that you could narrow down to specific evidence for and against, all right, that we don't have time to go into, but it's interesting to see what humanity has done with what is revealed and how they explain things. So I wanted to get a couple of your feedback. What do you guys think? Is something that just stands out to you that screams like, there must be a God. This shows his handiwork. This shows maybe some of these attributes that we've talked about. Let's just take like maybe two or three. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Hmm? Rainbows. Mm. Okay. Yeah.
Most of early scientists, Christians, 17th, you go back to 16th, 17th, 18th century, science takes off because Christians recognize that there is design in the universe, world, even in our own bodies, there is incredible detailed design. That's where science takes off.
Mm.
Most of those guys were
Yeah. And they thought of doing their due diligence to do their studies well, to think well, was an act of loving God with their mind. Versus people today will pit, God versus science. Well, no. People who come up with all kinds of scientific discoveries in those centuries, this is a way for me to express the amazement of the Creator to come up with these things. Yeah, one more.
The sun comes up in the morning,
Mm.
the world rotates, and then at nighttime becomes every day and every night, the same thing, how God has put us, the world, in action, axis, whatever they call it.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's His handiwork.
And to think that there is some predictability to it. I mean, not every predictability thing it works out, but that, hey, there's a rhythm here that actually allows you to do scientific investigation. If you could not say that tomorrow will likely be somewhat in order with the past, like, you need some of that in order to do your study instead of saying, well, we did a bunch of experiments, but tomorrow, who knows, it could be completely out the window. Good. This is helpful because I think when you're having a conversation with someone, what are you able to bring up? There's a mountain of revelation, not just here, because some people will be like, Bible, chuck it, don't need it. But a mountain of revelation that they can see. And how can you bring that up when you're telling other people about the Lord? Or maybe even bridging a conversation to even go in that direction. Maybe you don't get to directly say something about Jesus. Maybe you're initiating something that will lead to more things. Like asking a person a question. I was talking to this coworker a few years ago, and he was very much so into this idea that it's just energy. All of it is just energy. So it made me ask the question, so what you're saying is your love that you have for your daughter is just energy. It's nothing more. That's it. Essentially, it's just chemicals happening in your brain. So, for lack of a better word, it's meaningless. It startled him to be asked that question, because his thought never got to, do you realize this is the extension of your thinking? This is where it goes. Okay? Or to say, hey, if the whole point of our life is just to propagate our species, what's the purpose? It's just to have kids and then move on? Or do you realize what this means? Asking open-ended questions, to be a mirror. But, like you were mentioning earlier, they might turn around that mirror and ask you. And that gives you a chance to dig into, what is my foundation? Why do I believe this? What is this? How can I substantiate my claim that there is a God, He has said something, He has come in the person of Jesus Christ? Okay? So let's go ahead and finish up with our third reason, that people pervert the glory of God. Picking up in verse 21. For although they knew God, they did not glorify Him as God or give Him thanks, but they became futile in their thoughts, and their senseless hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for an image resembling mortal human beings or birds or four-footed animals or reptiles. This reminds me of something Jesus says. He says, the eye is the lamp of the body. If that lamp that is in you is good, your whole body is full of light. But if your lamp is actually darkness, how great is that darkness? It's like, if that's what's in there, it's supposed to lead you to being in the light, understanding some good. And if it leads you to evil, whoa, you have one serious problem. Words from Jesus there. You could read it in Matthew 6. It's just an amazing statement. What do we see here? We see people perverting the glory of God. So, verse 21, although they knew God, this is not a statement about knowing God for salvation. This is just a, hey, they have some recognition of God. They at least have some idea or maybe some details, even if it's vague, there's something there about their knowledge. If you track with Adam and Eve, they get clear, a very clear picture of who God is, right? He's walking and talking with them. And then they walk away, and then successive generations have a mix of walking away or being faithful. It's not that long before you start to dilute the knowledge of God and what he's revealed and who he actually is. Maybe you could say 5 generations, maybe you say 10 generations, but there's an initial seed of knowing that there is one true God, and then it gets distorted over time. So you would think if people knew God, they'd at least treat him like God or give him thanks, but no, they don't. They do the opposite. They do not glorify him, do not give him thanks. And so when you abandon God as the anchor for truth, well, what are you going to get? If you don't have an anchor, you're just going to float around. Oh, I'm going to float to this thing, that thing. Maybe I'll gravitate to this belief or that belief, and a salad bar of what I want to help me feel better or do things in life that I like. And now, we're not saying that everybody does this to the nth degree, that they do every possible terrible perversion of things. Differing degrees. Because there are some people, they do maybe a few things that happen to line up with the Bible. Okay? A blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while. Okay? Let's look at verse 22. Although they claimed to be wise, their minds. There's tons and tons of smart people out there who don't know God, who don't walk with him, who don't believe in him. Okay? We're also not saying that you shouldn't pursue knowledge. Those scientists pursued knowledge in an effort to know their creator. But they can pursue, quote unquote, wisdom by saying, you know what? I'm going to cast off God and pursue wisdom on my own. It has to be my own independent self-discovery, self-ownership. I don't need another outside source to tell me. I can discover it all for myself. I think what you're getting here is Paul's assessment of those who consider themselves wise, that they're actually foolish, to cast off and disregard the existence of God. Verse 23, they exchanged the glory of God for something else. Some of your translations might say, like, they exchanged the glory of God for an image of a likeness or a likeness of an image. Those sound similar, don't they? They sound like synonyms. It's kind of like saying, you're not even going to make a golden image of a bird that looks exactly like the bird. You're going to even distort that. It's like, not only have you disregarded God, you went to an animal, and now you're not even going to make it the shape of an animal. It's a multiple degrees of separation from the truth. They can exchange it for human beings, okay? Like making the sports star, the person who has achieved something that a culture values, right? Like in this culture in America, we tend to, elevate sports stars. So making a statue of them and saying, wow, that's great. Really, I look to that. That's my thing that I go towards. Or a pop star or movie star or whatnot. Or maybe even making intelligence, my own intelligence, my substitute for God. That I can figure out these things. If we just pooled all of our knowledge together, we would be able to dismiss God because we don't need that hypothesis anymore. Or they could go towards birds, four-footed animals, reptiles. The team that's going to Kenya, they might see some of that. Still happening today, 2,000 years ago. They're seeing what it is for people to create a caricature of God. And we can do that too. Say, no, God, you must answer this way. You got to operate on my time schedule. You're not completely sovereign. I'm not going to let this piece of my life over to you. That's a caricature of who God is. So, wrapping up, I think we see God's righteousness, his character, is on display in the gospel and on display in what he's revealed in this world. Whether you want to suppress it or not, it's still there. You still need to come up with some kind of explanation. And you can talk with people. Hey, where do you find hope? Hey, what do you think makes this world spin around? How come Jesus did this and he showed up and he said these things? Can you guys see why even just the first little bit of this letter can serve as an impetus for mission? To be on mission. If God has revealed all of this to all of humanity and he has shown up in the person of Jesus Christ, I can go across the world and tell those people who need Jesus just as badly as my next door neighbor. I can have this as an impetus. And a lot of missionaries have read Romans or a lot of denominational beginnings coming from the seeds in Romans. Say, wow, if God has established this, I can have confidence to go to these places and proclaim the truth to people who have a widespread practice of distortion or whatnot and bring them back to this is the truth that God has revealed. Because he's the one who's able to bestow the truth. He's the one who's able to bring righteousness to those who believe. He's the one who's able to address physical, intellectual, emotional challenges because he's the anchor for truth. So let's go ahead and pray. And if you got any other questions, you want to talk afterwards, we'll be glad to talk afterwards, okay? God, thank you for your word, and thank you for this created world that bears your fingerprints all over the place. It is a delight to be able to dig into how you put your fingerprints on things and how it reflects who you are. And yet we also are thankful that you give us your word as a filter for what we see in this world so we might understand it rightly. God, we pray that you would help us in our testimony to other people, to love them, to proclaim truth, and to show that there is only one anchor for it, and that is you. God, we love you. We trust you. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.